Yeah, it'll be done in 2 hours, he said, as we took it in 1 hour to finish layer 3. Shh, it's fine. It's fine. I would try my best. It's because I'm talking. I was thinking it was like a minute per slide. I might have been naive. All right. +1 and +1 and -1 counters cancel each other out. This is a state-based action. If a permanent has both a +1/+1 counter and a -1/-1 counter on it, you remove n of those, where n is the smaller of the number. So basically they annihilate each other. That's a state-based action. So yeah, if you haven't seen this before, what was it? Morning Tide and Lorwyn and Eventide. Lots of interactions between +1/+1 and -1/-1 counters. But yeah, they annihilate each other when they come into contact. 104.3F is impossible. So 104.3F is if a player would both win and lose the game simultaneously, that player loses the game. This is a rule that was very frustrating to me when I was originally trying to make a Magic the Gathering rules engine. Mostly because I was trying to find a test case for this, and doing research is like, you can't do it. You literally can't do it. So yeah, you start thinking about things and go, well, maybe, you know what, Lab Maniac, I'm sure we can get that working. Yeah, because we can deal damage to ourselves and then draw a card. And then you realize that when you're resolving a spell, you do things in a certain order. And then you look into other things like Nefarious Lich. Yeah, there's just no way of doing this. There's no way of doing this in the current rule set. There is no current way of winning and losing the game. This is just a kind of catch-all thing that in the future, if somebody somehow makes a scenario where this happens, it doesn't. You just lose. Infinity minus infinity is infinity. This is silver bordered, so it doesn't really matter. But if you gain infinite life thanks to a life-linking infinity elemental, and then your opponent hits you with an infinity elemental of their own, you're going to take infinite damage, but you still have infinite life. And that's just maths. So I'm going to skip. So, rule 100.6b, the greatest rule in the comprehensive rules. Players can use the Magic Store and event locator at wizards.com/locator to find tournaments in their area. So the question does remain, can you mindslave your opponent to force them to use the Magic Store and event locator at wizards.com/locator to find tournaments in their area? Possibly not. I believe it has to be in-game actions only for Mindslaver. But yeah, it's kind of just a nice weird one to have in there. Obviously it kind of makes sense in the grand scheme of things. Certainly when you look at, I think, the top level rule for that, it's talking about tournament rules and stuff like that. But yeah, just a lovely weird one to have in there. Tokens aren't cards. Tokens aren't considered cards. Even a card-sized game supplement that represents a token isn't considered a card for rules purposes. Yes, so I think the example I was asked to put here was Teferi's Realm? Teferi's Realm. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player chooses artifacts, creatures, lands, or global enchantments. All cards of that type phase out. So that's only going to affect actual cards. I think it's now been templated as all non-token permanents of that type. Time for Trample versus Deathtouch 3. Trample and Deathtouch and Double Strike versus Protection and versus Indestructible. So, if your 4/4 Trample Double Strike Deathtouch attacks into a 3/3 with Protection. So, in your first strike combat damage, you have to assign 1 to the creature with Protection and 3 to your opponent. 3 tramples over. 0 damage is assigned to the creature with Protection. So in the regular combat damage step, you have to assign that damage again in the regular combat damage step for a total of 6 damage in total. So that's kind of a bit of a weird one, but I think it flows on naturally from the other one where we were talking about having to deal 1 damage in the Protection case. If you're attacking into a 3/3 with Indestructible, the same thing happens, but 1 damage is marked on the 3/3 after the first strike combat damage step. It just doesn't die because it's indestructible. All right, mana abilities. Now, if you watched my video recently on mana abilities, you might have a bit of an insight into why these are weird. So, an activated ability is a mana ability if it meets all the following criteria. It doesn't have a target, it could add mana to a player's mana pool when it resolves, and it's not a loyalty ability. And then you also have triggered mana abilities, which are pretty similar, but they trigger from the activation or resolution of an activated mana abilities. And could add mana to a player's mana pool when it resolves. One of the fun ones here is Priest of Forgotten Gods, where you can target any number of target players. So the rulings on this are actually fairly clear. This is always a mana ability, regardless of if you're choosing no targets. So you could choose 1 target, you could choose 2 targets, you could choose 0 targets. We don't have a weird case where you, if you choose 0 targets, it's a mana ability, and if you choose 1 target, it's not a mana ability. Priest of Forgotten Gods is always not a mana ability because it has targets. It always is classed to have targets. All right, next one up, we have Grist. Grist can be your commander. So Grist's ability is not a characteristic defining ability because it doesn't define its characteristics in every zone, but it works similarly. So it's active before the game starts and makes Grist a valid choice when declaring your commander. So I believe this is also validated by Sheldon Menery, who's on the Commander Rules Committee. They basically said, yeah, this just works, right? It would be a lot better if it had a characteristic defining ability, but I think it would be a little bit weird saying that, oh, it's a legendary planeswalker. It's also a creature that's in all zones. Yeah, I don't know. All right, good one for now is phasing. Phasing. Everyone loves phasing. Phasing's the new hotness as well. Say the old new hotness or the new old hotness. So phasing is a mechanic where permanents may phase out due to an effect, causing them to be treated as though they don't exist until they automatically phase in on their next untap step. Phasing is also the name of the keyword ability that puts a permanent in a repeating cycle of phasing in and out every 2 turns. There is a thing called phased out zone. I think I might cover the phased out zone in a slightly different thing. I think it's a different layer, so I probably won't cover that now. But yeah, phasing's fun. Currently they're using phasing for make it go away but don't have it transition zones. That's kind of the big thing, is not having it move zones, but still treating it as not existing. It is kind of a good tech for that. There used to be a lot of weirdness around it. There used to be weird transitioning, which I think I will cover. If I don't cover it, I'm pretty sure I do cover it. But if I don't, I'll come on to it later. But yeah, things like tokens in the phased out zone used to be quite interesting. Paris Mulligan, hooray! So Paris Mulligan, after drawing hands, but before the game starts, the players decide in turn order if they'd like to mulligan or keep. Each player who chooses to mulligan shuffles their hand into the library and draws a new hand with 1 fewer card than before. Each player who chooses to keep his or her hand becomes their starting hand and is no longer able to take mulligans that game. So this is basically the Vancouver Mulligan. You don't get the scry. That was the one that I think it was Paris Mulligan for a very, very long time. Don't know how many years, but it feels like I was Paris Mulliganing for my entire Magic career until about I think it was 2015 when the Vancouver one came in. So, all right, Knight of the Hokey Pokey Errata. I just love the fact that Siberian Rabbit decided to put fun ones like this in. Yeah, Knight of the Hokey Pokey originally asked you to do something that's distinctly not the Hokey Pokey, and if you're in England, it's called the Hokey Cokey, which is also just an annoyance to me, but that's what the English card name is, Hokey Pokey. The Hokey Cokey received an errata around the times of Unstable, which requires you to do the full Hokey Pokey, and also it had a new errata around Unsanctioned, so you only have to do it with 1 body part. So yeah, obviously a point of great contention for Mark Rosewater to get those details into the silver bordered rules guide, as it were. So yeah, nice for that. Mnemonic aid counters, next one up. Some abilities put counters on to remind you that a permanent has certain qualities. For example, monstrous. Generally, these abilities are not tied to the counters themselves. So, for example, here we go. We've got the Arbiter of the Ideal. We have, if it's an artifact, creature, or land card, you may put it onto the battlefield with a manifestation counter on it. That permanent is an enchantment in addition to its other types. So it's always going to be an enchantment, even if you remove the manifestation counter. And if you move that manifestation counter onto something else, it doesn't mean that the thing that it's on is an enchantment. The exception to this is are abilities that say, for example, for as long as. So Aquatex Will, I think, is another example where it says that land is an island in addition to its other types for as long as it has a flood counter on it. So if you remove the flood counter from it, it will stop flooding. I think there's a similar one with blaze counters. So yeah, it's an interesting one. So they tend to do everything that has an ongoing effect. They tend to put some kind of counter on these days. Token ownership, slightly orange. This one. It used to be that whoever controlled the effect that created the token would be considered the owner of the token. However, now they've changed that. 111.2 is that the player who creates a token is its owner. The token enters the battlefield under that player's control. So there used to be, I'm sure there used to be combos where you could, yes, it was I think the hunted creatures, the hunted cycle, you'd create tokens under your opponent's control. You created them, so you were still the owner of those tokens. And then you could gain control of all creatures you own and gain control of those tokens. They've changed that. Good. It was a silly thing. It's one of these rules baggagey things again. So yeah, token ownership now just makes sense. Mirko Vosk doesn't mill. Yeah, I mean, kind of seems a little bit obvious if you, I mean, reading the card explains the card, but it might, to somebody who's looking at these abilities and going, well, why does that not work? You know, that's kind of what you're doing. You're putting cards from your library into your graveyard. Surely that's milling, right? But no, mill is a keyword, and you will only trigger Bruvak the Grandiloquent from actual milling, not just Mirko Vosk, who is kind of milling, conditionally milling, based on land cards. Ooh, fun. Yeah, transforming double face cards versus modal double face cards. They like their double face cards now, don't they? Wizards R&D. Yeah, transforming double face cards can transform. Obviously, the name sort of suggests that. But modal double face cards can't. Another interesting thing about modal double face cards, you can't put them onto the battlefield transformed. So if you if you had it in your graveyard and then someone says put it onto the battlefield transformed, just doesn't work. There's going to be more on these in a second, so I'm not really going to cover all of them now. There are differences to the two, and they don't obviously interact the same way, mostly around transforming. Replacement effects. Now we're starting to get into the fun stuff. This is the sort of the meat and bones of my content, unfortunately. The weirdness, the weird layers that we get. Yeah, replacement effects. Some continuous effects are replacement effects. Like prevention effects, replacement effects apply continuously as events happen. They aren't locked in ahead of time. Such effects watch for a particular event that would happen and completely or partially replace that event with a different event. They act like shields around whatever they're affecting. Yeah, these are the big fun ones, and tend to be templated by things like saying, if you would do something else. So yeah, this one here, thought reflection. If you would draw a card, draw 2 cards instead. So the original event doesn't actually ever take place. The game doesn't ever see you as saying, oh yes, you drew 1 card. It's like you always were drawing 2 cards. And you can replace multiple things. So if you had an effect which replaced card draw with something else, like bouncing a permanent, for example, the event would instead say, instead of drawing a card, it would be draw 2 cards and then that's replaced to bounce a permanent and draw a card, and the event would always look like that. So Yeah, kind of an interesting one. And one of the nice things is if you control both effects, you can do them in the order that you like. So if you had an effect that was replacing a card draw with, say, bouncing a permanent and thought reflection, and you did them in the other order, you would replace drawing a card with bouncing opponent, but then you wouldn't double it from thought reflection because there's no card draw to replace anymore. So yeah, kind of a fun one. It's one of these ones where in Commander you'll run into replacement effects all over the place. Certainly things like the Notion Thief is kind of a fun one where you're replacing additional card draws. Mana value of DFCs. Now, if you watch my videos, you may have seen this already. I've made a video about this. Mana value of DFCs. While a transforming double face opponent has its front face up, it has only the characteristics of the front face. While transforming double face opponent has its back face up, it only has the characteristics of its back face. However, the mana value is calculated using the mana cost of its front face. So if you copy the back face of a transforming double face card, the mana value of the permanent that is a copy is 0. Which when I found that out, it was bizarre. That is just unfortunately how it works. So it very rarely comes. I doubt it matters for pretty much anything, but the mana value of that opponent is 0. It probably matters for some removal spells, certainly things that care about destroying things, CMC less than 3, for example. Face down cards are always revealed by the end of the game. Fairly straightforward one if you've played with face down cards. This covers Morph and Foretell, plus any other effects where cards are put into a zone face down. At the end of each game, all face down permanents, face down components of merged permanents, and face down spells must be revealed to all players. It's basically an anti-cheating mechanism. So if you foretold a card face down, actually making sure you foretold something with Foretell, kind of a thing you should care about. Morph as well. Yeah, it's a thing that you should do. It's one of those things where I think at higher level play you probably would have to do it, but certainly in like casual play, it's unlikely to make much of a difference. Astral cards. Somebody was mentioning these earlier. Chandelier Astral cards. They were part of the original Magic the Gathering game. A semi-expansion of 12 cards known as the Astral set. The Astral cards have their own set symbol and incorporate various random attributes that will be difficult or impossible to replicate in real life. Having said this, that quote I took from Magic Wiki, I posted about this on Twitter the other day saying, give me my Aswan Jaguar in Magic Arena, because it feels like you could totally do the Aswan Jaguar effect in Alchemy or something like that, just a weird weird digital only effect. Just give me my Jaguar. So there are 12 of these cards, and they I think they do have some rules issues for some of them. Certainly things like, I think one of them is play X fast effects, maybe something like that. So it doesn't necessarily translate particularly well over. The nice one about Aswan Jaguar, I think this one you can actually get as a card, an actual physical card, in the game box. So there are physical copies of this card that exist in an oversized version, not an actual Magic card sized version. Next one, Urzas. Urzas is a land type. So if you're not aware of this, it could be a bit weird when you look at this for the first time, but yeah, lands have their own unique set of subtypes, and these subtypes are called land types, obviously. There you can have deserts, forests, gates, islands, lairs, locusts, mine, mountain, plains, power plant, swamp, tower, and Urzas. So mine, tower, and power plant are all Urzas types as well. It's a hack. It's a massive hack as far as I can tell. Rather to get around cards named a thing. Yeah, I think it's one of these things where it's trying to look for cards of the certain type, like Urza's Mine, Urza's Tower, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Saga is just the natural. I think the person who made Urza's Saga, the person who put that in the file, was absolutely just just laughing to themselves. Like the fact that it's like, I don't care how this is made. I just want to have a card that says Urza's Saga. I mean, I know we've made Saga types now. Can we make it a land? You know, what happens with that? And the fact that it actually got printed in the end is absolute genius to me. So yeah, absolutely love it.